should we give it a couple more minutes?
Yeah, we can give it a couple more minutes. We actually had over 40 registered, but some people do like to register so they get the kind of follow-up notes and slides and things. So it might be that we don't get quite that that number in attendance. But yeah, we can give it a couple more minutes. Great. Hi, welcome everyone that's just joining. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes because we had quite a few people that didn't that have registered that aren't yet here, and just want to give everyone an opportunity to join before we start. And just a little reminder to everyone that's just joined that we are recording. So if you don't mind, if you just keep your mics off, cameras on. Of course, we're all kind of familiar faces and lovely to see everyone, but if you can keep your mics off, just so the presentation's nice and uninterrupted, that would be fantastic. Brilliant. We are a couple of minutes in, and we'll very shortly have a more formal introduction from Andrew before we hand over to Cranfield University for the modelling the impact of regenerative agriculture on soil erosion and river water quality. I know many of you and lovely to see you, but my name is Rosie Wilmot. I'm with Herefordshire Council and I'm just facilitating sort of a very small role. You won't hear from me again after this, but just here to start the recording and do all the little fun bits at the beginning. But I will hand over to Andrew, Chair of the Wye Catchment Partnership Steering Group, for more formal introductions before we kick off.
Well, good evening and welcome to everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. It couldn't have been a better night for us to be discussing this subject, because anyone that's driven around Herefordshire today, which I've done quite a lot, it's quite interesting to witness the soil runoff. So couldn't be more apt. I'm very pleased to introduce some very timely work by Cranfield University. As I said, at this time of the year, we witness soil runoff. We now know how important it is to keep soil on farm and out of the rivers. Tonight's presentation will shine a spotlight on this. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Cranfield University, it's a specialist postgraduate only public research university. I've been fortunate enough to do some programs there, so I know them well. It's based in Bedfordshire, near London. It's renowned for its leading expertise in technology, engineering and management. We're really lucky tonight to have with us Robert Simmons, who's Professor of Soil Management, plus one of Cranfield's leading lights, who has done all the hard work on this project, PhD researcher Lisa Donovan, who you'll be hearing from very shortly. I think this topic initially started 10 years ago by the EA, but more recently has been funded elsewhere, and I think today probably Severn Trent has been one of the major players. But I'll hand over to the Cranfield team, and I think Professor Robert Simmons is just going to give a little bit of background about the whole project and put it into context. So without further ado, handing over to you guys at Cranfield.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining. So as a background to the project, it probably started way back when Sarah Olney was working in the catchment. So that would have been 2010-11, with a master's thesis that was looking at how could we use the Morgan-Morgan-Finney model as a predictive tool at a catchment scale and a field scale. We then got onto a range of other PhDs that we were running in the Wye Catchment with the Wye and Usk Foundation, Douglas Bunfield Trust. There was one on cover crops undersown in maize, one on filter socks to reduce runoff and erosion, and another PhD on controlling runoff and erosion from asparagus. And then we revisited this again with some work that we had done with Andrew Osbaldiston and the EA. And then more recently, Lisa did her master's thesis, which was funded by Anglian Water, Richard Reynolds at Anglian Water. And the thesis was so good that we were then able to get Lisa's PhD fully funded by Severn Trent, Southern Water and Anglian Water. So this is 3 water companies funding this piece of work that is undertaking research in East Anglia, the Western Rother and the Eastern Yar, and over in Severn Trent catchment as well. So I will now be quiet. We'll is hard for me, and I'll go over and start. If you have any questions as we go along, I'll try and answer them in the chat. But we have planned to have a pause on slide 9 because we want to throw the questions back to you as well. Okay, so I'll just hand over to Lisa and move out the way. Thank you.
Right, so here goes. Thank you for joining online. So yes, like Andrew and Ralph said, I'm Lisa Donovan, a PhD student at Cranfield University, and I'm very excited to share some of my PhD work around the topic of modeling the impact of regenerative agriculture on soil erosion and river water quality. Oh, wait, sorry. I actually didn't share my slides.
Have you shared them? Yeah.
Now, yes.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Right.
Cool.
So let's start from the beginning. Soil erosion is actually the process of transporting soil particles at the surface by wind or rainfall. And this, so for my PhD, I will be focusing on soil erosion by water in agricultural land. And in this typical scenario, well, there are natural factors impacting on soil erosion, but also human factors, such as using the improper tillage or the inadequate crop for each field, and it can generate some devastating consequences, such as what we see in the photos at the top here. So rainfall or irrigation can directly impact the soil surface and generate runoff. And with that, the soil particles at the surface are also washed away along with the runoff out of the fields. It can also leave behind some erosion features that are more or less visible. And as we can see in the photos at the bottom, well, the satellite images actually, well, these erosion features can cover quite a big area as well. And just to let you know, these images were actually from the Wye Catchment. Yeah. Now, some of the main factors that generates soil erosion in agricultural fields are bare soil and conventional tillage, for example. Rainoff would directly impact the soil surface, and that rainwater, that rainwater can't really penetrate down into the soil profile because of all that compacted soil and the impermeable plow pan that is left behind because of the conventional tillage. And because that rainwater can't really infiltrate into the soil profile, well, a lot of runoff is generated at the surface and soil erosion as well in this case. In parallel, there is also a loss of CO2 within these agricultural fields. But soil erosion it doesn't just end at the field boundaries. It also impacts the areas downslope. For example, there's an increased risk for our floods, sediment, nutrients, and pesticides end up in rivers. And that is because the nutrients and pesticides found in the fields themselves sometimes cling onto the soil particles, and well, it gets washed away along with the runoff downslope. Now, there are multiple ways to mitigate this risk, such as cover crops, and minimum tillage. These practices are sometimes referred to as nature-based solutions, and they're part of what some people refer to as regenerative agricultural practices. In this second scenario, the rainfall would not be directly impacting the soil surface because it would be intercepted by the canopy of the cover crops. Now, the canopy of the cover crops also helps attenuate the erosive energy of rainfall before reaching the soil surface. And when rainfall does reach the soil, it can infiltrate much easier into the soil profile because of how the minimum tillage and the roots of the cover crops just really help with breaking down that compacted soil and making it a lot more porous. The roots of the cover crops also help with using up the nutrients found in the soils, and they help with increasing carbon sequestration within the fields. Now, in general, the presence of the cover crops and minimum tillage therefore reduces runoff and erosion, also because a minimum tillage leaves behind these crop stubble. So the cover crops and this crop stubble helps keep in place the soil particles within the fields. And so this means that there's also less pollution in the rivers downslope. Now, cover crops and minimum tillage are not really new or innovative practices, but the evaluation of their impact on soil erosion and river water quality on a larger scale has really not been investigated, especially using soil erosion prediction models. So this is where I think it's a really good opportunity for research to be done more around this topic, particularly if we know just how damaging soil erosion can be on the environment, for example, and how in the future with climate change and the more frequent rainstorm events, the impacts of soil erosion is only going to be exacerbated. In parallel to that, the government has also been encouraging and incentivizing water companies and farmers to mitigate this risk. For example, via the asset management plans and the WINIP programs for the water companies, as well as via the sustainable farming incentive for the farmers. So this brings me to mention the aim of my PhD, which is to model the monthly impact of overwintered cover crop mixes and minimum tillage on soil erosion risk from agricultural land and on river water quality. I will be doing so by using the modified Morgan-Morgan-Finney model as a decision support tool. Now, the exciting bit is that this model at the moment is a fully functional field and catchment scale model. So the Morgan-Morgan-Finney model is referred to as a semi-empirical model. And basically it just means that there's a good compromise between how fast and easy it is to use this model while having accurate model outputs in the end. And the model does that by using different parameter categories, such as the plant cover parameters, the rainfall and climate parameters, the slope parameters, and finally the topsoil parameters. This model is able to calculate the amount of runoff and soil loss that is generated for each field. However, there are certain caveats to the current version of this model, especially if I want to apply it for looking at the impact of cover crops and minimum tillage. The most obvious ones at the moment is that, well, this model doesn't have any parameters for either cover crops or minimum tillage, because at the moment it can only predict soil erosion from cash crops and conventional tillage. The current version of the model also calculates soil erosion on a year-to-year basis, and only for individual fields or cells. But these 2 points really show a disadvantage if I want to use the model for my PhD, because, well, the agricultural practices are much, well, they follow a monthly and seasonal rhythm a lot more than a year-by-year rhythm. And just like what I mentioned previously, well, soil erosion doesn't just stop at the field boundaries, it also impacts the areas downslope. And finally, this model at the moment has only been validated against soil erosion plots found within the fields. The improved version I am suggesting would have parameters for cover crops and minimum tillage incorporated on top of the already existing parameters. I will be modifying the model structure so that it can be run on a monthly basis, and I can and I have a simple approach to compare the model outputs with the runoff flow paths and the sediment discharge points within the catchments. Finally, I can compare the model results against water quality data, such as turbidity and total suspended solids. So for my PhD, the study area consists of 6 different catchments. So the Hayham and Stoke Ferry catchments in the Anglian Water region, Western Rother and Eastern Yarra catchments in the Southern Water area, and finally the Mitcheldean and Thames catchments within the Severn Trent region. And as you can see, the Mitcheldean catchment is actually within the larger English Wye catchment. So hopefully, at least at this point, I've caught your attention a little bit more. And these different catchments were selected because they capture variability in terms of soil texture, slope, rainfall patterns, and the main crop rotations. From the water company's point of view, these catchments have turbidity or suspended or sediment issues from areas close to the drinking water abstraction points. Finally, these catchments also have natural protected areas, such as sites of special scientific interest and drinking water protected areas. Now, one of the first things I really needed to understand for my PhD is when the cover crops are actually implemented within crop rotations. So let's take a typical scenario of winter wheat being grown in fields from October to August. And actually from there on all the way to March, there is a period where the land is left bare without any crops in. And from March to September, there would be typically a spring crop that is grown, for example, potato. And it is this 6-month gap in between the 2 crops, which I just refer to as the bare soil period. This is the period when cover crops should and can be implemented within rotations. And actually, the sustainable farming incentive encourages farmers to implement cover crops within that period, that overwinter period. Now, moving from theory to practice, I wanted to understand when those cover crop windows are for my study catchments. So the way I did this is that I calculated the main crop rotations for 2016 to 2024 within all the study catchments and plotted the drilling and harvest dates for each of the crops. And what I found what I found was quite interesting because I've observed two different categories of cover crop windows. One that is shown by the blue rectangles. So that first cover crop window is rather short. It is less than 5 months long and occurs generally in autumn. And the second cover crop window is much longer, of at least 8 months, from winter to spring. And if we think about it from the soil erosion risk point of view, well, to mitigate soil erosion risk, we would really want to prioritize implementing the mitigation practices during this second cover crop window, because, well, the winter to spring period is exactly when there is a lot more frequent extreme rainfall events. And this is also the reason why from here onwards for my PhD, I decided to focus on the overwinter cover crop cover crop window. Now, even more interesting, in my opinion, is to understand how the overwinter cover crop windows actually evolve, depending, how they evolve temporally and based on the different catchments. What I've noticed is that the overwinter cover cropping windows, they are influenced by the crop rotations that are in place. For example, in the Anglian Water region, those the main crop rotations influencing the overwinter cover cropping windows are those with sugar beet. For Severn Water, those main rotations seem to be the ones with maize within the rotation. And finally, for the Severn Trent region, there isn't one particular crop rotation that stands out compared to others, but I have noticed that the rotations with potato they influence the cover crop windows a lot more than the rotations with potatoes for the other catchments, for example. And in addition to this, I've also noticed that there are some external factors influencing the overwinter cover crop windows. For example, if we look at the 2020-2021 period, compared to the rotations compared to the year before, I have noticed that there's a decrease of the rotations of winter wheat followed by spring barley, and an increase of the rotation spring barley followed by spring barley again. And this could be due to the previous year having a very wet winter and autumn period, which means that the following year, the farmers had to rely a lot more on spring crops. In addition to this, regardless of the catchments, I've noticed that there is a general increase of the rotations with maize by comparing the 2016 to 2024 period. And at the same time, there is overall decrease over time of the rotations with Springfield beans. And this could be due to probably maize being used more and more as a bioenergy crop for anaerobic digestion, for example. But also it could be used a lot more for livestock feed. But I think, well, Richard Reynolds from Anglian Water did say that in the Anglian Water region, he did notice that maize was grown a lot more for anaerobic digestion. So I would be really curious to hear what you have probably observed in the Severn Trent Water Catchment, Severn Trent area, and if it agrees with these data.
Yeah. So yeah, so this is we'd like to sort of pause here and throw this question back to you. Lisa's done a really good job of taking the crop map for England data. We've got the from 2016 to 24, and then looked at that data to identify the rotations within the catchments that are most significant within each of these priority catchments for the water companies. But when Lisa presented this result, these visualizations to us the other day, I mean, I think this is a really powerful story, and be quite interested to see. Obviously, you can see the difference between Anglian Water and Southern Water. Southern makes significant reduction in potatoes, for example. Severn Trent, for these two particular catchments, surface water catchments, you can see that potatoes, the area under potatoes hasn't really changed too much. But the area under maize, or that has a maize within the rotation, has significantly increased, so 100% increase, whereas the field beans has decreased. So the question for you is this what you're seeing? Is this representative of what's happening within the Wye catchment more broadly? So happy to push that question back to you as an audience.
Don't know if you can see my hand, but I'm Simon from the Wye Foundation. We work with I think we've got about 1,000 farmers that we work with in the Wye systems. I think it's actually about 1,250 now. And our latest calculation is that there's about 4,500 hectares of AD maize in the catchment, and that's relatively new. And what that's done is it's pushed high-risk crops up into the foothills of the Black Mountains. And what the citizen science is showing is that there's the Black Mountains and the streams draining the Black Mountains, that area have become the epicenter of soil loss in the catchment now. And Herefordshire is winding back in terms mid-Herefordshire, which used to be in 2012 sort of the epicenter of soil loss, is winding back as more and more farmers are putting cover crops, farming in a way that looks after their soil. But we are seeing pretty catastrophic soil loss now in streams like the Monnow, the Hardwick Brook, the Rhiangath, the Lumbey, and the streams that drain the Black Mountains.
Thank you very much, Simon. Can you have you still got my email from years back?
Possibly.
It'll be at the end of this presentation, I think. But it would be interesting to follow up on that actually after the webinar in more detail, because I've seen that trend over the last. I've been in the Wye since 2008, working in there, and I have seen in the area, like you say, that central area, there's an increased increased number of farmers that are growing cover crops over winter, rather than there being bare soil, because I haven't seen it, but I hadn't realised it had just been pushed up into the more marginal areas.
I had the misfortune of driving the road on the south side of the Wye along the Moccas the other day when it was raining, and it was quite spectacular.
Which is not a good thing. No. Okay, thank you, Simon.
It's Andrew. I don't think we would be surprised when you look at the amount of potato and maize grown potentially in our catchment, which are possibly the two worst crops for soil erosion anyway. There has been an enormous amount of work done on cover crops, but one of the things that I uncovered this year, because I couldn't understand where suddenly I'd seen the satellite pictures from November, which showed everything green. And I then saw massive soil erosion. And it transpires that there's been, the issue was when we then looked at the satellite pictures for December and January, what were, we thought, green cover crops were in fact turnips, which tack sheep turned out on, which then actually turned them to brown fields. So, you know, that's another thing that I think we have to be certain about when we, as I said, in November, we thought fantastic, cover crops everywhere, not going to be an issue.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because the sheep will have, they'll cause shallow surface compaction, poaching, which will exacerbate the runoff issue, significantly exacerbate the runoff issue.
Just to add to that, we have been in a program of, we've conducted 430 saturated infiltration tests where we flood the soil first and then measure the rate at which water moves through when the soil is saturated. And I think we've got 19 grey stubble turnip fields in the data set. Every single one is zero. Every single one is zero.
Was that shallow sort of that really? I mean,
it's about,
brown.
It's about an inch. It's about an inch on the it's on the brown earth soils, and it's about an inch compaction.
Capability Brown used sheep to compact the clay in the water features that he had in his gardens because they were so effective at compacting the soil.
And the bit of kit we use to compact the floral wetlands that the contractors use is called a sheep roller because it mimics sheep's feet.
Yeah.
I can see someone's got their hand up. Is that Anne?
Yeah. Go ahead and speak up. Sorry.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, or
does Simon know how many anaerobic digesters there are in the Wye Valley that he's talking about near the Black Mountains? Because I know that Herefordshire has a lot of anaerobic digesters that you know were built some years ago now, but it's interesting that their maize growth has kind of gone down slightly. But do you know how many are in the Black Mountains area?
I'm not in the Black Mountains area. I know how many are in the catchment. Sorry, I don't know. The last I heard was that there were 14, but I might be slightly out of date on that. I'm not aware that there've been any who've gone through planning in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, because I did notice when the one was built near Talgarth that in the couple of years following that there was an increase in growing maize between Hay and Brecon.
Yeah.
Another hand up. Sorry, I can't see your name.
It's James.
Yeah, thank you for a fascinating presentation so far. I mean, building on Simon's point, we were back in English Nature Days aware of an increase in potatoes in the upper catchment. And I'm interested to understand whether, and this is 95-6, it was happening with predictable results. So has there been a switch from potatoes to maize, or is the two going on? Is first point. Second point is what you're describing points the need for integrated solutions, not just a focus on nutrient and on soil. I mean, the reason why those sheep are coming onto the stubble turnips, partly at any rate, is to get them off the mountains. And that's partly driven by agri-environment schemes. So we have a perverse outcome that no one intended, which needs to be addressed through a policy fix. And similarly, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping to solutions here, as is my wont, why on earth are we tolerating the growing of maize on steep slopes in the upper catchment when regulation is surely the right answer?
Yeah, so your first point is actually quite interesting. I haven't looked deeper whether I haven't dug deeper to understand whether maize or potatoes, well, either one is replacing the other year after year. But that would definitely be something interesting to investigate a little bit further. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the maize, I think what's important also to remember is a lot of the maize and certainly the potatoes, it's all on land that's contracted in or contracted out. So there are measures that can be put in place to reduce runoff and erosion from maize. We've done them as a PhD. There's undersowing cover crops 6 weeks after drilling. There's post, there's management that can be put in place, but some of this has got to come from, as well as for potatoes, the landowner that says to the contractor, you can only grow potatoes on my land, or you can only grow maize on my land if you put an understory of cover crops in. Yeah, or if you use a wonder wheel, or if you put a buffer strip halfway across the field, or whatever. So a lot of this has got to come from the landowners being able to collectively say, you can't use my land unless you put these measures in place. And I know farmers in the Wye Catchment that use the wonder wheel on a regular basis to improve infiltration into wheelings. I've done designs for fields where we've split fields in half, so we've got a big buffer strip going through the middle, and things like that to reduce the runoff and erosion. But a lot of it, personally, I think, yes, we've got to have this very good point, James, of this collective, consistent sort of, not consistent management, integrated management. But there are measures that can be put in place, but some of it's got to come from legislation, but also sort of collective action, I think.
Rosalind, you've got your hand up. You're on mute.
That better?
That's it.
Yeah, so I think Simon has a very big point. I'm on the parish side of the Wye Catchment. There's very little maize grown here, but what is increasing is this grazing of sheep. One of the things is that poultry manure and the high phosphorus is very much, it grows these turnips and stubble crops very well. They do very well. They don't mind too much phosphorus, and they grow very well. And it's a way of sheep farmers avoiding what they traditionally used to have, which was either the homegrown oats with a protein balancer, and it is a way of fattening their lambs. And I think that's much more of a problem. And you certainly see, as you say, they're all paddling around in mud. In theory, they are supposed to have grass run back, but it doesn't happen in practice.
Simon, you've got another.
Just to add to that, we saw this problem coming way back in 2014, I think it was, and with money from Dŵr Cymru, we built our own undersowing drill that had the tines that fitted the maize and started to undersow. There's now 3 of these drills working in Herefordshire. They are very successful in that when the crop comes off, you have a lovely green. Well, within a couple of weeks, you've got a lovely green mat on the ground. But they're almost exclusively going into dairy units and for dairy maize, because AD maize that you have to do something with your Westerwold vetch mix or whatever you put in underneath the maize crop, and you get 6 tons of dry matter from it over the winter, and that sort of fits with dairy farming. AD tends to be grown, as you said, on contract ground. It tends to not have fences. It tends to not have water. It tends to not be suitable for grazing with sheep or grazing with cattle after post. That cover crop is not used, if you know what I mean. Some people are doing it who are maize on maize and then ploughing it back in again to increase soil carbon before they put the maize back in, and recycle the nutrients before they put the maize back in again. But that's relatively rare. It's, as I said, the dairy, I think we are getting on top of. Dairy maize we're getting on top of. The AD maize is a problem, but I have got a solution for that, but that's not for this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think unless Rosalind's got another question, or we can drop hands, we need to move on with the rest of the presentation, if that's okay.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Rosalind, you're on mute again.
I just want to drop my hand. I don't know how to
Oh, right. No, that's all right. You just go back up to the raise hand symbol, I think, and you can drop it. That's it. Perfect.
That's it. Right, back to you, Lisa.
Yeah. Right. So from here onwards, I will actually be diving a little bit deeper in terms of how I'm setting up the model, how I'm measuring the new parameters that I want to incorporate into the model. And so starting off with the parameters for cover crops and minimum tillage, these are the big new parameters I want to incorporate into the model. For that, I actually set up different field trials at Cobury Farms, Dyson Farming, and Langmead Herbs. So three very different areas geographically. And for each of these trials, so each trial site followed the randomized block design with 2 cover crop mixes from King Seed and Oak Bank, as well as a control. And as the field trial, all of the field trials started in September and went on until January, late January to mid-March, depending on just the rotation of each farm. And I went back to measure the cover crop and minimum tillage parameters each month between. So the parameters that I measured are shown on this right-hand side here. And the measurement methods that I used were a mix of manual measurements, photo analyses, destructive sampling, and some incorporation of third-party data. And the way I chose the measurement method was really based on how sensitive the model is to these different parameters. So, for example, the more sensitive the model is to a specific parameter, the more likely I would actually want to measure it directly manually or by taking photos and analyzing those photos. So there are multiple parameters, but I just chose 2 of them to show in the slide. For example, canopy cover. Okay, I'm sorry if the laser is lagging a little bit, but for example, for a canopy cover, it is not surprising that throughout the months, I have noticed an increase for the canopy cover of the cover crop mixes. However, another interesting observation is that the canopy cover of the weeds and the volunteers also increased within the control blocks. This was only observed, however, at Cobury Farms and Langmead Herbs. So the graph at the top and the graph at the bottom. And this, this observation wasn't visible for Dyson Farming. And I believe this is due to the tillage method that was used. At Cobury Farms and Langmead Herbs, the cover crops were directly drilled into the soil, while at Dyson Farming, the soil was min-tilled before the cover crops were drilled in. So the minimum tillage probably have just controlled the emergence of the weeds. Now for ground cover on the right side, not surprising to not see any variation throughout the months because the model actually defines ground cover as the percentage cover for all the dead crop residue that is left on the soil surface. So this ground cover really is linked to the minimum tillage, which in my case, all 3 farms follow minimum tillage and not one of them is under conventional tillage. Now, in addition to the parameters I measured myself, I also gathered other data sets for all of the other parameters required by the model. For example, the climate and rainfall parameters, I used the HAD UK grid dataset from the Met Office. For the topsoil parameters, I used some values from my field measurements, but also literature values and information from Cranfield University's Landis Soil Series database. For the slope parameters, I gathered all the data from the Ordnance Survey's OS Terrain 5 dataset. And finally, for the cover crops, well, of course, a lot of the parameter values were from my field measurements, but I also complemented that with information from the Environment Agency, the FAO, and some values from literature as well. Okay, this laser keeps on lagging, sorry. In parallel, I also made some structural adjustments to the model. For example, for the climate and cover crop parameters, under the current version of the model, these parameters are, well, they're only available year by year, year by year. However, with the improved model, they will be available for each individual months and corresponding to the overwinter cover crop windows that I mentioned earlier. Now, for topsoil and the cover crop parameters, under the current version of the model only uses a list of generic values, and those values, well, this is regardless of the study area that you are interested in, but with the improved version of the model, I have pixel field catchment specific values for these parameters. So these 2 points really adds more refinement to the model. And I'll explain a little bit deeper what I mean for each of these 2 points. For example, so starting off with moving from the annual model to the monthly structure of the model. If we use rainfall as an example, the current version of the model would be able to show us on average what is the total rainfall for each catchments. For example, in Severn Water catchments, we have over 900 mils of rainfall per year, but with the monthly model, I will able to see how that annual rainfall is distributed month after month. And the graph really shows just how different the rainfall pattern is between the winter months and the summer months. So yes, this really illustrates just how much more detailed the model would be, well, how detailed it already is. Now, concerning the point on moving from the generic values to the field or catchment specific values, I'm using the topsoil parameters as an example. The current version of the model has a list of all the different soil textures, and for each soil texture, they also have the corresponding soil characteristics such as soil moisture and bulk density. But in real life, if we look at the soil texture triangle, there are so many different clays that can exist, or so many different clay loams that can exist in nature. And while this generic list of parameters really doesn't capture all that variability, so this is where for the improved version of the model, using the Landis database from Cranfield University really helps with adding that additional level of detail, because the data from that Landis database it really helps me understand, first of all, spatially speaking, where are the different soil textures located within each catchment? And for each of those soil textures, I'm able to link the soil characteristics of the dominant soil series for that soil texture. And this means that in general, for example, I would have instead of having just one value for the clay loam, a generic clay loam, I would now have, with the improved version, clay loam values for specific fields or specific catchments as well. And now the really exciting part, the model outputs. With the different parameters, the Morgan-Finney model calculates on a 10 by 10 meter pixel the predicted soil loss rate. So the screenshots here actually are the model outputs from my master's thesis a couple years back. So the legend here is in tons per hectares per year, but with the improved version of the model, I would have the output as tons per hectares per month. And as you can see, the model calculates soil loss per pixel, but then the results can be interpreted and visualized at different scales, so field scale and catchment scale. And slowly adding layer after layer for this PhD process, after running, using the model, I will be able to test different scenarios, especially focusing on that September to March period, because that's the cover cropping window. The first scenario I really want to test is to compare how the soil loss rates would be with and without the cover crops. And second of all, how the results would change if we incorporate climate change in. And the climate change scenario would be possible because I could use the UK climate projections data set from the Met Office, for example. And with these different scenarios, what I really want to understand is whether there are any differences in terms of the trends for soil erosion hotspots, but also what is causing those differences. Is it the crops or the soil texture, or the climate? And second of all, how different would the impact of cover crops be if it's under the current rainfall and climate pattern and the future climate? Now, I have been talking about water quality data at the beginning of this presentation, and this is me coming back to it, because with the Morgan-Finney model, another thing that can be done is to compare the predicted soil loss rates to the turbidity and total suspended solids data. That can be done by running the model for year-specific months. For example, if we look at, say, September 2019, I would have that layer of model outputs. And on top of that, I could link it to, I could position the location of the water quality data sampling points with the corresponding water quality data for each sampling point. And finally, I would also have the runoff flow paths that is calculated from slope in another software. So with all these different layers, I can easily understand which fields with high soil erosion risk is actually impacting the river water quality. However, at this point, there's just one small caveat. For this analysis, at the moment, it is probably best to do it on a subcatchment level, because, for example, if we want to look at the water quality data from this particular sampling point in the middle of the catchment, it will be really hard to understand if the water quality is impacted from a field here, further up here, or even all the way up north in the catchment here. So by focusing on smaller subcatchments, it would be a lot easier to pinpoint the fields that would be impacting on the water quality data. And finally, just to end this presentation, I made a little video showing the results of the model that I made for the MSc thesis, just to really show you how everything works, all the input data, etc. I will just need to end. Oh, sorry, before that.
Any more
Yeah.
questions? Sorry, while Lisa sets that up, because she needs to open an additional program.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions on what's been? Okay, I've just seen that. I've got a bit about. I've been answering lots of questions as we've gone along. So any more questions on what Lisa's just discussed? Or just
so good.
Yeah, only one quick one. Lisa, how are you modelling risk of a field? Are you modelling risk of a field? We use SciMap to generate risk,
Yes.
and then basically it takes into account, once you do real life SciMap and you work out what the where the ditches are and where the hedges are and what the field use is upstream, and then you plug that into a landscape, you can identify quite clearly where the risky fields are. Do you do that, or how do you do it?
So
you mean risky fields as in off-site impact?
No, as in we've got a matrix of risk of crop against risk of field.
Right. Okay.
So fields are great, and then you have an exponential increase in soil loss as you move up through that matrix.
Right. Yeah. So so basically it is a score, not like a soil loss rate that
Okay.
That
so
you're generating, Simon, because
for SciMap, from what I understood, sounds like there's a matrix that you follow, and in the end you have a score on I don't know, like out of 10, like how risky this field is in terms of soil erosion. Is that it?
Yeah, we break them on a scale of 1 to 5. But yes,
Right,
yeah,
right.
yes.
Okay, yeah. So sorry if I was using some terms
0 to 5.
interchangeably during the presentation, but this model doesn't generate just a soil erosion risk score, it really has an output for the amount of soil that is just lost from the field. So that is tons per hectares per year for the current version, but that will be for tons per hectares per month once I have the improved model.
Yep. So Lisa will run this video, and at the moment, because it's working on a 10-meter pixel basis, and it brings in all of these parameters that are readily available parameters. What it will do also is it will show the risk within the field. So it's related to slope, of course, changes in soil type. At the moment, it will give it. So if you say I'm growing potatoes in this field, you can use the generic values from the Morgan Finney paper for potatoes, and it'll give you an estimate of predicted sort of erosion risk. What Lisa is going to do really for her PhD is really focusing on, essentially validating the effectiveness in terms of erosion risk prediction of utilizing these cover crops. And the things that Lisa wants to look at now is, so currently it's an annual model. Breaking it down into a monthly model means that she can focus on this overwinter period very specifically, but also moving in from, because crops aren't grown on a January to December basis at all. So, we have to fit in within that cycle. What this will allow us to be able to do is run it for an entire catchment and say, okay, where are hotspot fields based on soil type, slope, crop grown? You can run a scenario for a field if you have different cash crops grown. You can run a scenario for the same field if you have cover crops for the overwinter period moving into the bare soil period in, when you've got the crop being drilled or sown or planted before it's established, and then the harvesting of maize, for example, in that autumn period. Again, so we can run these whole scenarios. So I think it will be a lot clearer when Lisa runs this video.
Hopefully.
Okay. Yeah. So Lisa's did this video for her master's thesis because Anglian Water catchments, but the same thing, all of these models can be run for any catchment in the UK.
Yeah.
If it's the Lug catchment, if it's a Clun catchment, if it's the ones that Lisa's already doing as part of the PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can just be applied. And the beauty of it is as well, because Lisa's got the data from 2016 to 2024 for the crops that were grown at the time.
That's like 9 years of data.
And we've also got the surface water quality data from the water companies. At a sub-catchment level, if we've got those monitoring points, then we can look at, well, where was the erosion risk within this catchment at that particular year? And then look at hotspots, reoccurring hotspots within the catchment. But also what I think is incredibly valuable is the fact that you've got all of this citizen science data.
Oh, yes.
And you've got measures of other sort of water quality characteristics that you've been measuring that could also be linked to the data that potentially could be generated from this model. So I'll be quiet now and let Lisa run the model.
Yeah, the video. Yes, so now the screen should be sharing again. Yeah. In this video, I'm going to show the results of the Morgan Finney model from my MSc thesis in 2022. So on the screen at the moment, what you're seeing is the surface water catchments from the Anglian Water region. I'm going to first show the input data required by the model, starting off with the crops. So the crop type data, as you can see, are summarized for each field, and each color represents a different crop. Now, if I click on one of these fields, we see that there's a crop code. In this case, it's crop number 12, which is linked to a separate lookup table that has, so on the left, there's the crop codes corresponding to the crop and all the vegetation parameters. Now, then we have the rainfall data. The rainfall data is from the Met Office, and it is at a 1 kilometer resolution. So we can see that from the different pixels here. So the Hi, sorry. I see that some people are saying that they have lost the sound. Can someone else confirm that this is not the case for everyone?
Yeah, the sound was lost.
Oh,
All right.
all
Okay.
right. Well,
Do you want? Do you want to? Is the
I
sound
can-
playing through your speaker?
Did you mute yourself, Lisa? It might be that if you've muted yourself, then the sound isn't playing.
Oops. Okay. Well,
Do you want to start again?
yeah, I can. A lookup table with the different soil parameters.
Can you
on the
hear that
right.
now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So sorry about that. I didn't know.
Do you want Lisa to start back from the beginning? It's only 2 minutes.
I think we got to about the rainfall data.
Yeah. Go back to the
Okay.
rainfall data.
Okay. Let's. One is the slope data. Okay. Yeah. Oh. Rainfall data.
Yeah, start from there.
That's it.
Yep. 1 kilometer resolution. So we can see that from the different pixels here. So the areas with darker blue represent the areas with higher annual rainfall. Next one is the slope data. Yes, taking a bit of time here. The slope data is calculated based on the Ordnance Survey's digital terrain model. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, we see that there are areas with a darker brown, like here, and those areas represent the places with higher slope gradient. And finally, there is the soil texture data. So each color represents a different soil texture. And just like for the crop data, each soil texture has a code. So if we click on this one, the code is 2. And this code links to another lookup table. Same format as the crop lookup table with the different soil parameters on the right side. Now I'm going to show you the results of the model after using these different input data. Here is the result for 2016 if cash crops are grown in the fields without any cover crops or minimum tillage. And each color represents a different interval for the predicted soil loss rates. So the areas with red are the areas with the higher soil loss rates, and the areas in darker green is where there's the lower soil loss rates. If I zoom a lot closer, we can tell that the soil loss rates are calculated for each 10 by 10 meter pixel, which can then be viewed at different scales. So at a field scale, at a field scale like here, or even bigger at a catchment scale. So for my MSc thesis, I had one map like this for each year from 2016 to 2022. And from these maps, we can tell that the different crop types are influencing the soil loss rates just because sorry if I'm zooming in and out, we can see that crop type is influencing the soil loss rates quite a bit because of the variation from field to field. But we can also tell that the soil texture influences the soil loss rate. For example, if I overlay this current layer with the distribution of the soil textures, if we focus on these two areas here, we see that the areas with the lower soil loss coincides with the different soil textures. Now for one of the catchments, I also tested out the scenario where cover crops and minimum tillage were implemented. So this catchment in particular, I reduced bulk density and increased increased canopy cover as per the evidence I found in literature, and the result is here. So this result is only for 2016, but even so, when I switch between the baseline scenario and cover crop and minimum tillage scenario, we see a really big difference already visually. And for 2016 to 2022, I found that the average reduction in predicted soil loss was about 20%. So really quite significant difference already. Now, finally, the model outputs can also be compared to the water quality data. If I switch back to the baseline, as the results of the baseline scenario here, I can overlay that with the location of the rivers and of the water quality sampling points. So those are the triangles. I can actually look at the crops that are grown within the fields with the high soil loss. For example, let's take this field here. If I overlay that with the crop type map and click on that, I see that the crop type is, crop 8. If we go back, 8 would be peas. So now that we know this field corresponds to the peas, we can compare that with this graph I found in literature on the erosion vulnerability for different types of crops. The fields with peas are the most vulnerable to soil erosion between October and December, so corresponding to this post-harvest fields. So remember, August to December. Now, if we look at the water quality data of this sampling point, the water quality data shows us this. For 2016, we see a peak in turbidity in November, so November actually agrees with what I just showed you here in the graph. It's between the August and December period. So yeah, this was a quick run through of the model results, but as you can see, this can be a very useful tool for decision making. Thank you very much.
Oh, you did all that without even moving your mouth. That's amazing. Okay. Maybe any more slides?
So yeah, no, that is the end of my presentation, the slides. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully you have many. So yeah. And I am just.
We've got a question.
I always jump in.
Yeah.
Are you relying on glyphosate to kill off the cover crops? Did farmers use low doses of glyphosate to kill off the cover crops in min-till scenario?
In the field trials, yes. Actually, I have a little slide prepared just for that.
But it
yes.
can vary, Simon, as well,
Yes.
depending on
Yeah.
whether or not they're crimping and rolling and incorporating, or
Yeah.
find glyphosate?
So I believe it was, so it's two trial sites, where 2 out of the 3 trial sites where the farmers did terminate with glyphosate, either glyphosate alone or grazed and then just finished off with glyphosate. Yeah.
But obviously, yes, obviously that has implications for water quality itself.
Yeah.
But there are alternative options for removing that cover crop as well. There's a question here about linking to the water quality data. So that was just a scenario for Lisa's MSc. Lisa's gone far beyond that with the current PhD in terms of how slick and how effectively the model works now, because it's all very effectively running in Python script. It runs and it's presented in ArcGIS. And the cover crops are incorporated. The next step is to then look at monthly and changing the temporal resolution of the model. But the idea is to then to sort of pseudo validate the runoff predictions with some looking at some connectivity within the model as well, to look at water turbidity and
total suspended
solids.
Yeah. So something I didn't have the time for the PhD is really looking at that connectivity between the different fields and how that leads to the rivers. So that's why.
Extra slide.
Yeah.
Have you got an extra slide? You have got an extra slide.
Do I have an extra slide on that? I think not particularly for this.
Okay.
Yeah, not particularly for this, but what I will be doing for the PhD is compare the model results with the flow paths that are calculated based on the slope in another software. So this would indicate connectivity between the fields, and this is something that I didn't have for my master's thesis.
But the other thing that's really important is if you can look at connectivity between fields, not just connectivity between fields, but it's connectivity to a road, for example, and then down the road drain or down the road into the watercourse, which can be really important. But it's also looking, if you understand the connectivity, you can understand which again are your priority fields within that flow path that you can have interventions, and you can break that flow path to reduce that connectivity. I think that's a really important feature of the decision support tool as well.
It really acts as a screening tool to prioritize. Go ahead. I see multiple.
Andrew first, because I think Simon's had a lot.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah. Well, Simon E's had a lot anyway.
Yeah. Lisa, it's a bit of a cheeky question, but and I'm going to quote one of our ex-prime ministers. When will your new process be oven ready to be used elsewhere?
Oh, elsewhere. Well, first of all, I will have to submit my thesis by the end of this year.
Yeah.
And from there onwards, well, since this model is easily transferable to other areas, to other catchments, it really depends on the different projects.
Yeah. I think it's also, Andrew, I think it's a really good point, because I think this is Severn Trent Water have part funded this. They funded, a third of the funding came from Severn Trent. So I think that's a discussion to have with Jodie Retinue, who's, I think, one of the principal catchment.
Yeah, Jodie
and Adam Freer. Yeah. To say, look, would you like this to be run for the other catchments, other priority catchments like the Lug and the Clun, for example? So I think that's a question to consider, because once Lisa's finished the PhD, or even during she's got to generate the outputs for the PhD, but also to deliver to Severn Trent, to Southern Water and to Anglian Water anyway. Conversations with Jodie to see whether or not they could fund potentially for this to be run for the Lug and the Clun, for example, or part fund it. I think
it's a really interesting project, and I'm so pleased that you've given up your time to present it, Lisa. I don't want to get caught in who owns the intellectual property rights at this point, but I can see that it has great applications elsewhere.
Yeah. I think that was a thumbs up from Simon, but it looked more like a fist.
Yeah.
And we got Simon Montgomery.
Yeah.
Good evening all, and Lisa, yeah, very, very interesting what you've presented tonight. From a farmer's point of view, it's almost quite frightening, because you have got the data of landowners' land being farmed and cropped multi-year, and you can, at a stroke of a pen, almost see the persistent offenders. Which brings in the carrot and stick approach from a regulatory point of view. Just one, and it's potentially a loaded question. The sampling points for your turbidity, are those in areas that are exclusively draining from land owned by or farmed agricultural land? I.e. there's no contamination from any other facility or building site, because at the moment, as you know, they're building houses everywhere. And one of the issues I have down here in Devon is we're having huge amounts of runoff on light sandy loams around Exeter, which is going into watercourses, is being blamed on farmers. But most of this is actually coming off the Cranbrook development site all around Exeter Airport.
That's a really good point. So the water quality sampling points are the sampling points from the water companies themselves, and they really capture just the turbidity as a result of all the activity upstream. So this is also why at the moment, to compare the results of the model to these water quality data, I would first want to start with smaller subcatchments, just to be able to better pinpoint the areas affecting the water quality, because otherwise, yes, the source of turbidity can be from agriculture, but any other industrial activity as well.
Riverbank erosion, for example.
Erosion as well.
Yeah.
So yes, I cannot just naively say, oh yes, here this field has maize. Oh, and we see high erosion, high turbidity in the river. So it's a cause and effect relationship directly. But at least in terms of trends, are those trends going in the same direction? This is what I'm looking at the moment. I cannot use the water quality data and the model results to pinpoint exactly this is the source of soil erosion.
That's not the from a water company perspective, when Lisa first started the PhD, it was really Richard Reynolds over at Anglian Water that quite clearly stated that they recognizing that the catchment is part of their critical infrastructure, that they have to manage in a way, incentivize farmers, and they don't call them farmers, they call them businesses. It's a business to business relationship, actually. That was his term, and I totally agree with that. Because these water abstraction points, they have to shut them off if turbidity is too high. So that has a huge cost to the water company for a start. So from their point of view, it's far more cost effective to work on a business to business level to say, okay, what can we do to support you in order for you to be able to, there was lots of work on metaldehyde in years gone by Severn Trent and other water companies. Now there are other pesticides that they were working on, but the driver for this PhD was sediment. Particularly, let's say, for southern water with the Western Rother, for example, and the Eastern Yar.
I would very much like to pitch here then, because if you were to ever have the funding and the resources to do the Wye Catchment, we have 50,000 results of testing the water. So turbidity is tested up and down the Wye Catchment once a week. So you get a much better hold on where it's coming from, and it is something that we're looking at fairly closely. I know Simon's now left, but he's very close to his heart, because we're seeing that as being one of the issues: movement of soil, which moves chemicals, because they, as you said, they stick to the soil. So certainly, we have got an enormous amount of turbidity data available here.
And the other thing is, particularly in Herefordshire, you got light sands, you got clay sands, you've got a lot of sandy soils. You've got a topography that basically promotes concentrated flow paths, tillage orientations that will concentrate runoff to those low points, etc. potentially. But it's all the fines that you're losing. So in a lot of cases, let's say you have riparian buffer strips and things like that. Yes, you will trap the larger soil particles, but the fines, which is the discoloration of the water that you're seeing, for example, is what is transporting that sediment-bound P, the organic matter, and the pesticides off into the water. So you've got a very visual discoloration of the water.
We've got one person on, I think they're still here, Mary, who has the most brilliant piece of photography footage, which are two parallel fields going through the same gateway. One is pouring brown water and soil, and the other one's coming off running absolutely clear. So it just goes to show, that is the difference that we're facing. So you're absolutely right, Robert. It really it is as simple as that in some instances.
But it's also, I think there was a comment earlier about, I think the government incentives or recognition by government that soil is a finite resource that's as valuable, if not valuable, more valuable than oil. We worry about oil, we don't worry about our soils enough. A lot of farmers do worry very much about their soils, but it's whether or not they have they understand what measures are available to reduce erosion, and whether or not there are incentives that will allow them to do that economically and still run a viable business.
Yeah,
I think that is crucial. I think Richard Reynolds, that comment that he made, that they have business to business relationships, was really important.
Well, I think we've reached the bewitching hour.
We've got one from James, Andrew, if that can be the last one.
Yeah, let's go with James then.
Oh, golly, pressure on. Last question.
Yeah.
I've posted something about sharing the data with those in government and the agencies that actually are responsible for policy design and regulatory design. I think that would be very important.
Yeah.
I just want to challenge gently the idea that the Cymru and quite possibly Severn Trent have anything more to do here, because the source apportionment data on nutrient wouldn't support that. And as I think it was Andrew that said before, this would have to be paid for by water charge payers who've just seen a 30% increase in their water bills. And we know that we're looking at de minimis further improvements beyond the completion of AMP8. So we really are looking to find ways to incentivize and or regulate the farming industry. I think we, in the Wye Catchment, why would Cymru spend money incentivizing farmers? It's charge payers' money, and there isn't a business case. By 2030, they will be contributing less than 10% of load. Doesn't make commercial sense for them. And it's not for me to speak for Cymru, it's for Cymru to speak for them.
I mean, I did say to Rosie, is that okay, Rosie, if I say Rosie? Yeah,
please do.
I did say to her earlier that we're quite happy to come down and do another meeting for the wider stakeholders to present this again when it's in its kind of more final form. And I'm quite happy to do a webinar on mitigation measures that we've tried and tested and validated for controlling runoff and erosion, either down at the next meeting face to face or a webinar online, because there are measures that can be put in place to reduce erosion. There's no question about that. It's whether or not, how do we do that in a cost effective way and show that there are benefits to the farm business of doing that.
And I think you just hit a really good nail on the head there, Robert. It's how do we get that across? That in actual fact, a farmer's only assets really are his soil, and if he's losing it at such a rate, he's just throwing money away. So I think we probably would like to take you up on a further development about mitigating soil loss. I think that could be really interesting. But I think we've reached that bewitching hour, and I'd just like to say, I got one word: wow. I wasn't expecting anything as far-reaching as this. I think it was an excellent presentation. I think the discussions have been great. I'm going to ask Rosie, there's even better questions and answers in the chat, so can we be sure that we capture all of those? And I'd like to say, a really big thank you to Cranfield, especially to both of you, Lisa and Robert. This was our first Wye Catchment Partnership webinar. And I think that we've all now seen how beneficial this can be, because in our meetings, we can never give enough time to actually cover subjects like this. And a specialist subject comes across so much better. So I think this has been great. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's given up their evening, and just say, is there anything that Lisa or Robert wants to say? Brilliant evening. Really thankful for your forbearance in giving up your time to actually present this.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure to show some of the exciting stuff I'm working on for the PhD.
And again, it's thanks very much for all the really, I find it really useful, always find it useful to have webinars and things like this, and have face-to-face discussions and walk on farm and things like that. I have learned so much from the chat that I would never have learned if I hadn't attended this webinar. So it goes both ways. Well, so thanks very much for all of the comments and all of the questions. And I put my email in the chat. Rosie's got that. So if you've got any follow-up questions, then just send them.
Fantastic. I was just going to mention, as there's still a couple of hands raised, if we're all right to suggest that anyone with follow-up can email you directly, and or liaise through us, but I think any responses that you can give would be sort of really welcomely received by the wider group as well. So really interested to carry on sharing the work you're doing. And as Andrew says, we've come to that time, but I'll share the links, the chat, the recording, and the presentation, as well as Robert's email, so we can sort of continue the conversation outside of the webinar.
I'd like to say it's great to see so many new faces to this event. It really has been great to see that there is such an interest to understand these issues in more depth rather than jumping to conclusions. You know, blame the farmer. Well, often the farmer isn't even aware of some of these things. So it's a question of how do we find solutions? How do we work with the farming community? I'm a great believer that blame shouldn't be in any of our meetings. It's all about, you know, focus on the solutions, focus on working together. Okay, I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone, and we can all go and have a glass of wine or something to eat. And Rosie can log us all off and go home.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.